Hello. Good evening from Portland, Oregon. We're really happy to be doing our second week of the Tin House Writers Workshop. This week we are featuring our nonfiction, poetry, and graphic narrative artists who are watching here on Zoom. And I'd like to welcome everyone that's watching there on Zoom, or YouTube, excuse me. Before we get in tonight, I did want to mention something. I know we've been sharing a lot of information at the start of these about the events that are taking place here where Tin House is based in Portland. And I wanted to mention a specific organization that's been doing work here for a long time and laid the groundwork for a lot of the protests that are currently going on. And that's Don't Shoot Portland, Don't Shoot PDX, which is a Black-led and community-driven organization that has been on the ground here in Portland since 2014, calling for accountability within our local police department. On June 5th of this year, Don't Shoot filed a class action lawsuit against the city of Portland, alleging that the police have been using tear gas and excessive force indiscriminately against the protesters. And so as there's a lot of national coverage starting here in Portland, I want to make sure that we don't erase and center the work of the Black activists here in town. And Don't Shoot PDX has been at the forefront of that. So I thought it was important to mention that to begin tonight. We're going to, there'll be a series of links that we'll be providing. They're there on the YouTube page, and I'll post them shortly to Zoom. And if you are someone that has the means and do want to support activists here in Portland, Don't Shoot PDX is one that we have supported and we highly recommend. Really excited to have our first conversation this week with Bassey Ikpi and Melissa Febos. Bassey Ikpi is a Nigerian-American writer and mental health advocate. Her debut essay collection, I'm Telling the Truth But I'm Lying, came out from Harper Perennial in 2019 and was a New York Times bestseller. Her essays have been published by The Root, Ebony, Huffington Post, and Essence. Bassey is the founder of the Seaway Project, a mental health organization that centers Black and Brown people in an effort to spread mental health awareness. And she's also the creator of the hashtag No Shame Day, an initiative that attempts to reduce stigma and increase mental health awareness. Joining her is our faculty member, Melissa Febos, who's the author of Whip Smart and the essay collection Abandon Me, which was a Lambda Literary Award finalist and was named a Best Book of 2017 by Esquire, Book Riot, The Cut, Electrical Literature, The Rumpus, Lance Cleland, and others. Her second essay collection, Girlhood, is going to be published March 2021. You can find all the titles for our speakers and guests this week on bookshop.org. And again, that link there is on the YouTube page, and I'll post it shortly on our Zoom. And Melissa's also just recently moved to Iowa, where she'll be an associate professor at the university in the nonfiction writing program. And I'm so happy for the students there. Not only is Melissa one of the best writers, but she's one of the best teachers we have out there. And speaking of that, I'm also going to post a link to a craft essay that she posted in the Swanee Review earlier this year. It's one of the best essays I've read on writing nonfiction, particularly writing sex in nonfiction. And I'm really happy to be able to share that. And all right, without further ado, I'd like to bring Bassey and Melissa to the stage.
This is the part where we turn our videos on. Hi.
There you go.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Bassey.
Hi, Melissa.
Thank you so much for doing this with me. It's weird and wonderful. And I'm just pulling up my little notes. I'm having such a good time here at Tin House. I just want to say thank you to Lance and all the other faculty and all of the participants, and especially my class. We've only met 2 times, but I feel like we're already a family with our own familial lexicon, and it's been really sweet. And I am so excited for the people that know your work but haven't heard you speak before, and the people who don't yet know your work who are on this call. Because you're amazing. And hi.
Hi.
How
are you? How's Iowa?
It's intense. It's been a lot of things. It's really beautiful here. And we spent the first 3 weeks without any of our stuff. It just arrived yesterday. So there's like some boxes behind me, as well as Danica. Say hi, Danica, everybody. Can I show you something that arrived this afternoon that I'm excited about, that I know you'll understand?
Yeah.
This is the galley of my new book. It just arrived. And for those of you watching who have published books, you know that at least for me, getting the advanced copy, it's like the first time that you hold your years of work and tears and everything in your hand before like any weird reviewers get their hands on it. And so it's like, for me, it's one of the sweetest moments. So
oh, congratulations. It's such a pretty book too.
Thank you so much. So I thought that it would be really perfect for you and I to have a conversation here, because my students at Tin House are all working on super intense, really amazing material, and they're in the middle of the process of figuring out the best form for it, and sort of making their way through both the emotional and psychological and aesthetic and craft decision-making process with it. And I know that you and I have both had like long, interesting, complicated processes like this. And I find that conversations about books like ours that deal with really personal, intense material that people don't often talk about in the course of daily life tend to sort of fall into 2 categories. And they either sort of talk about the emotional experience of it and the personal experience of it and the personal experience of writing about it, or it's a craft discussion. And it's much more this kind of conversation than it is a craft discussion. This is the one you usually get with writers. And for me, it's those 2 processes are so deeply entangled, right? Like they're inextricable for me to separate sort of the experience of revisiting and moving through my past experiences and making sense and story out of them, and also the aesthetic project of making art out of them, So I thought maybe we could start by could you describe your book for the viewers tonight a little bit? And maybe talk a little bit about about your process of arriving at the form that those essays ended up taking.
I knew this question was coming, and I still am trying to figure out how to answer it. Um, for category purposes, it's a collection of essays. But what I was writing and what I feel is that I was writing a collection of nonfiction short stories. It's very important for me to have that distinction because I wanted to be able to write this truth as though it was fiction, because that was the best way for me to tell the story as accurately as I could. There's no way for me to have told a story about living with bipolar disorder from a non-clinical, non-technical perspective. It was very important to me that it wasn't full of, statistics and, wiki facts and 9 out of every 10 this and every fourth that. I didn't want any of that. I wanted it to be as true as possible to my experience because I wanted it to convey, I wanted to be able to explain to people what this was, what it feels like, what is confusing about it for me, how it feels to live in it. And the best way to do that was to be able to throw away everything everyone had told me, except for you, had told me about what it means to write nonfiction. So the book is about a person living with a brain that is trying to figure itself out without any language for it, just the experience, and trying to figure out the best way to convey that experience to people who needed to know and may not understand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, that works. That works. It's also quite beautiful and very intense. Yeah, it's the kind of book that you don't ever want to take a break from reading, but that sometimes you kind of have to take a break from reading because it's such an intimate gateway into that really immediate experience. Would you talk a little bit, because I know that the book sort of started off as one concept, and then when you were actually like on the page working it out, it completely sort of transformed a little bit. And something we've been talking about in my class is like having a plan at the beginning and how important it is to have a map that you feel comfortable with, and also how important it is to be willing to like crumple it up and throw it away when the work starts talking to you about what form it actually needs to be in. So I feel like your story about that would be really helpful.
Yeah, so the book that the book that we sold was not the book that I ended up writing. And I struggled with that initial book because I was trying to fit, I was trying to fit what people told me a nonfiction or memoir or whatever was supposed to be. It wasn't supposed to be in these, these stories. It's supposed to be a standard, she was born this day, and then some stuff happened when she was 4, and then when she was 7. Like it was supposed to fit that. But then I also had this added pressure that I gave myself of making it inspirational. For some reason, I wanted people to feel inspired by me and feel like, oh, she's doing so well, and she won bipolar disorder. I don't know. But the irony, I guess, is that I was struggling. 2016, when I started writing the book, was one of the most difficult periods of my life. And I honestly did not believe that I was going to come out of it. I thought that was it. So me trying to write this book that was completely filled with lies and trying to rewrite my story to make it better for me or better for the people who would read it if I wasn't around. I was trying to create this mythology for myself. And I struggled so hard to write the book that I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to write it at all. I read your book, Abandon Me. I read The Shape of Water. I read these different books that were doing, they were speaking to me on a cellular level. And I felt like I wanted that. I wanted to be able to do that. But I couldn't do that with the confines and the restrictions that I'd placed on myself. And no one really had placed those things on me. I decided that I was going to do this. And once I reevaluated the purpose of the book for myself, I was able to and also I had an editor who was very open to. My editor, she saw me struggling. She saw that I was turning in these essays that were they're just terrible. They weren't about anything. They had almost like some sort of like happy ending. Each essay had a lesson at the end, and it was just terrible. It was bad. And I told her that I was struggling. The title of the book was restricting me as well, because the original title was Making Friends with Giants, which is this like, this huge title that had all these implications that I just wasn't living up to. And once I gave myself permission and was given permission to just write whatever. And she said, write whatever, we'll figure it out. I'll edit it into something else. I had to think about why I wanted to write a book. As a Black woman, I didn't know how many chances I was going to get to write books. And as a person who was living with depression at the time, I didn't know how many books I was going to write. So I had to decide that if this was the only book, and it looks like it is the only book that I'm ever going to write, what do I want that book to do? And once I gave myself that out, that no one could, who's going to fight me? I kept thinking, like, who's going to fight me if I write the book that I want the way that I want? And once I did that, and also I'm all over the place. I was running from my poetry background. I was running from it. I didn't want to write a poetic book. I didn't want to write poems. I didn't want to write any of that. And running from that, or giving myself permission to go back to that, freed me up in the way that poetry did when I first started writing it. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you absolutely answered my question. And I also relate to it so much, like when I was writing Abandon Me, both in terms of the content and in terms of the structure, I had a very, you don't really know what your beliefs are until you are confronted with an opportunity or the necessity of challenging them, right? Sometimes. Yeah. And I had an idea about what an essay collection looked like, and it did not look like the manuscript that I had written. It did not have a bunch of short essays that sort of looked at the same events from different vantage points, and then one like super long motherfucker that was like 150 pages long. Like, that was not the book I had set out to write. And even more sort of disconcerting was that I had been writing a story with a happy ending, with a particular kind of happy ending, because I was trying to live my way into that. And when I finished the first draft of like that final long essay in that book, I gave it to a good friend of mine who's not a writer, but is an anthropologist and had really sort of watched me live the experience. And after she read it, I was like, preparing myself for compliments, and she called me and she was like, so this is really beautiful. And it's also fiction. So she was like, I think you basically wrote the story that you wished was true, and also the version of this story that everyone who read it might be happy with and would not make anyone mad at you. And it's not true. So you need to decide if you want to talk about what really happened, and if you
was it the same person, because I feel like I had a conversation with somebody. Yeah,
it's painful, but then like that first step is agonizing, and then when you step into it, suddenly there's so much more possibility, right? Because the story that we're trying to wish ourselves into is really rigid and small, which is why it feels so safe, right? And once you step away from it, like, the possibilities of discovering what's actually true and what has actually happened to you and who it's made you become possible. So I am really glad that you decided to write the book that you wrote. And I'll bet that you've gotten a million trillion letters from people talking about how inspired they are by your story, right?
Yeah, I mean, I to this day, especially with what's going on with Kanye and just the experiences that we're having now with COVID, everything that's happening in the world. I've gotten feedback from people. I received feedback from people who have said that, and this is like the biggest compliment for me, I didn't know how to say that. I didn't know how to explain this to my partner or to my parents or, you know, my sibling, or even I have a sibling that I didn't understand, or I have a parent that I didn't understand, and reading your book, you know, put me in their mind. One of the best emails I got was from this woman whose son had been recently diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and she said that she read the book, and so many times she's been like, just go to bed, just lay down, just, you know. And she said, I didn't know what was going on in his head or what was possibly happening in his head. And reading your book and reading, you know, what it is, and you explaining, this is why I can't go to sleep. This is why it's difficult to eat. This is why it's difficult to just go outside or just do all these things that well-meaning people suggest you do when they're trying to be helpful. Stuff like that, it really makes me feel like, if nothing else does, it makes me feel like I did something, and it makes me feel like it was worth it. And I'll be honest, like, a lot about the book has not felt worth it, but stuff like that definitely feels worth it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was wondering, I'm wondering a lot of things. We're not going to get to them all, but because you're not working at this conference, and so you won't be giving a reading, I was hoping that maybe you would read a little bit for us from your book, and maybe particularly, so we can talk about it afterwards, if there's a passage that was particularly sort of challenging to find the form for, or to revisit the experience of. I mean, you know, whatever you're comfortable with. But yeah. And show them the cover so they know what to expect in their mailboxes after they order it after this conversation.
This is the cover. People have a hard time reading it, and I thought it was pretty straightforward.
I love the cover.
Just read it down and then read it back up. There's an interesting story about the cover too. They sent me an email. The publisher sent me an email saying, "Oh, we're gonna, you know, send you a cover. You know, we hope you love it." And they sent it, and I didn't love it. And because I'm not a visual person, I didn't know how to tell them what I didn't like. I just knew that I didn't like it. And a really good friend of mine, Matthew, is a graphic designer, and I sent him the cover, and he'd read some of the stories, and I asked him to help me craft an email to send to them to explain what I didn't like. And he said, okay, I'm busy right now, but in the morning I'll have an email for you. And in the morning, he didn't have an email. He had 7 cover mock-ups. And this was one of them. And I sent, yeah, so it's a pretty cool story.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I had one in mind, and then I changed my mind.
You take a minute, and I'll tell
Okay.
people the file that I have. So this is like a public service announcement, basically, because this is a thing that happens for most people. Like, the first cover they send you is often not, they're like, you're gonna love it, we love it, and it's just like not it, you know what I mean? And it's just, you know, there's a lot of tastes and intentions to sort of correlate to make a good cover. But I was so picky and crazy about the hardcover for Abandon Me, which this is the one that they finally came up with, which I really besotted with. But there were literally like 25 covers before that one, and I said no to so many, and they were all over the map. And it got so that my like Libra people pleasing sensibility was so freaked out. I said to my agent, I can't say no anymore. And he was like, forget it, I'll just stop copying you on the emails and I'll do it. And I have saved all of those covers, some of which are good, they're just not the one, in a file. And I tell all my students, like, once you're at that place and you're negotiating the cover and you're afraid to say no, text me and I will send you the file of all of the covers I said no to, so that you know you aren't the worst. I was the worst. So if your next book, if you encounter it and your friend isn't available, I'm happy to send you those files too.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Don't know if there'll be one, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, God bless everyone with a friend who will design them or replace them.
But I mean, before I read this, I just need everyone to know, and I'll say it again at the end of this, like, the conversation that we had over coffee, tea, that first time, when one of the things I was so scared about was other people in the book reading it and what they thought, and how to write other people in a way that was kind to them. And I don't remember your exact words, but I remember walking away from that conversation with a new understanding about how to approach other people in my book. Because you wrote so kindly, but truthfully and honestly about the people in your life, and so beautifully that it gave me permission to tell the truth, but tell it in a way that showed and covered everyone in it with love or respect or something. So I really appreciated that.
I'm so glad. I remember that day you had just come up with your new title. You were like in the pivot towards like the full version of the book that you ended up finishing. So
yeah, that was the weirdest time. Okay, so I'm going to, this is probably not the right, but I'm just gonna bite the bullet. So there's an essay in the book called, and I just lost it, called This Is What Happens. It's a very, very long story that is in the middle of the book. And I had to fight for this essay because they wanted to edit it down to about 7 or 8 pages. And so much of it would be lost if that happened. And I told my editor, either it all goes in with, of course, edits that make sense, or it goes away. Like there's no way to cut it in half. And what it is a story about a 24-hour period during, I was part of a Deaf Poetry Jam, and I was on tour with them. And then I was also doing other tours, like college tours. And there was a 24-hour period when I was in between flights, and I was in the midst of what I know now to be a mixed episode, hypomanic and depressed episode. And I broke down this 24 hours into hourly, minute intervals. And the reason for that was to show how much happens in my brain in like 5 minutes or in a minute and a half or however long. And I think that this illustrates, because there are other essays that I wrote afterwards that mimicked a depressive episode. So the story, so the lines were really long, and there were blocks of text, and it just felt really slow. And I wanted to make sure that people were just as exhausted as I was. A lot of the feedback was, by the time you got to 2 a.m., I was exhausted. I was like, me too. I was also very exhausted at 2 a.m. after not sleeping for 4 days, so yeah, so this is what happens. "1:05 a.m. I'm so tired that I can't sit still. I don't understand this. If I sit, I shake so much that I need to stand. And when I stand, I need to move until I'm tired. But no matter how tired I get, I still can't sleep. I'm walking quickly from one side of the apartment to the other. I have to keep moving, and my hands, I can only shake them, can only wring them, but never fast enough. Nothing is fast enough, not the pacing, nothing, only the words dancing circles inside my head, the thoughts running and racing faster and faster until I'm begging for my skin to slide quickly off my bones. I spin around a few times, searching for something that will make this stop. Maybe I'll tire myself out. I'll have no choice but to collapse from exhaustion. Maybe my heart will explode from beating too fast. Maybe this time I won't wake up. 1:30 a.m. Faith is a matter of interpretation. My belief in God has always been circumstantial. Disbelief requires too much proof. I don't have the time. 1:35 a.m. So for the next few minutes, I'll put everything I know into believing. 2 a.m. and God accepts no bargains. 2:01 a.m. I am on the floor again, this time holding my head and rocking back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. This is not helping. 2:09 a.m. I'm waiting for this to kill me. 2:10 a.m. I have to stand up, move, more pacing, more wringing of hands, more holding. This trembling will not stop. 2:15 a.m. and God accept no bargains. 2:30 a.m. bedroom, living room, kitchen, living room, bathroom, bedroom, living room, kitchen, living room, bathroom, kitchen, bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, living room, bathroom, kitchen, bedroom, kitchen, bedroom, living room, living room, living room, 2:50 a.m. I stand still and close my eyes. I start counting backwards from 2000, 953, 952, 951. It's working, keep pacing, keep counting. 493, 492, 491, 490, 489, keep counting, it's working. 3 a.m., the shaking has lessened. 3:20 a.m., I get to 1, but keep my eyes tightly shut. I'm afraid if I open them, it will all return. 3:31 a.m., I wish I could sleep like this. 3:40 a.m., you can't sleep now. You have a plane to catch in a few hours. 4:05 a.m., I need water. Water always stays down. My body is both heavy and empty, but at least everything is quiet.
Woo! They're all doing this at home, just so you know. It's like my heart rate is up. And I mean, you can see in the comments, people are going nuts, but it's, I mean, obviously she wasn't on Def Poetry Jam for nothing. The professional reader. It's crazy. It was like it made me sweaty with anxiety. And also I felt like I could dance to it while you were reading.
That's new.
So, I mean, this is just like a perfect example of, I can't wait to teach this essay. This is, when you said you were going to read from it, I was so glad, because it's one of my favorite in the book, because it's such a perfect, you know, we talk a lot, especially in undergrad classes, about like the relationship between content and form. And I think once you get to a sort of more sophisticated level, you start to understand that form is content, right? And that you are communicating the meaning through the form, through the sound, through the movement of the work. And which is why like my body wants to move listening to it, you know, and why like I had to like stop and take some deep breaths after I finished that essay. I'm so glad that you fought for it in the book, because it feels like a vital organ to the picture that you're communicating with it. So thank you so much for reading that. I guess I'm wondering, like, I don't know, for me, so much of writing about experiences like this, experiences that were really hard to survive, that I had to sort of count the seconds to move through when they were happening. And in the process of writing, it feels sometimes like constructing a little model of what happened, and then both sort of observing it and also stepping back into it to sort of move through a pantomime of what happened, so that I can fill in the blanks, and so that I can sort of replace it in the context of like my current day consciousness. And I'm wondering about that process for you. And I guess like both sort of what it feels like to write that when you've lived it, and then also how it might have adjusted your relationship to the past, right? And your relationship to that experience, you know?
Like I said, in 2016, when I started writing something, I was not doing well. I wasn't a healthy person, and I was going to therapy 4 or 5 times a week. That's how concerned everyone was for me. And by the time you and I met, we had gone down to 2 or 3 times a week, but it was still more than the once a week. And now I'm like once a month. But had I not been in a space where I could discuss the things that I was writing, and remind myself, let me back up a little bit. One of the things that came out of this book was me being able to look at everything that I'd been through all at once, because it's very easy to separate things and say, oh, this thing happened and that was terrible, and this thing happened and it was terrible, and this thing happened, and just sort of break things apart. But when you look at everything together, what I kept coming back to is that I got out of it. Like I was gonna say resurrected, and that's so corny, but I have come out of so many things so many times that I actually felt powerful, and I felt empowered by that. So it inspired me to keep going in and digging, because now I wasn't afraid of falling into it. I was focused on how many times I got out, and writing towards understanding that I was here, and I am here, and I had experienced all these things and I was still here, it made it much easier to go into that. It made it much easier to revisit them. I was very careful about, I wasn't there to just dig through traumas and leave wounds. I wasn't trying to do that. I think that a lot of times, or often, when people do that, they are, in some of the memoirs that I've written, I've wondered about the writer, like, are you okay? Because you just dug all this stuff out, left it, and I don't know what happened. Not that I was nosy, but just like, are you okay? Because that's a lot that you just did there. And I didn't want to leave anyone, and I don't know if I did this successfully, but I didn't want anyone to leave wondering if I was okay. Like, I'm okay, you know, and because that was something that was very important to me. And there were some things, there was memories that were showing up as I was writing that I needed to deal with. Stuff from like my childhood, things that I wasn't very clear about. And I wrote that, I'm not clear about this. I don't know what happened. I don't know what the details are. And I'm not going to make up details. I'm just going to tell you that I don't know what happened, but I know something happened, and I didn't feel it was necessary. I had some pushback where people wanted me to go in and, like, you know, try and piece this together, try and figure out what this. I was like, no, that's between me and my therapist. I'm not going to do this in this book. I'm not going to find something just to place it in the book. And if it doesn't show up, then it doesn't show up. And I think that the book that I was writing gave me a lot of freedom to say, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to. I'll do other things, and I'll be very clear about the things that I don't remember. There's an essay in the book that I tell a story from 3 different perspectives because I don't remember exactly what happened. I know what I was told, I know what I told other people, and I know what kind of happened. And I was able to write every version of that. And that was helpful to me because it gave me a space to understand a moment in my past that I'll never fully understand. I don't know if that makes sense, but that was just as important to me as having concrete answers, if not more so.
Mm-hmm. And I think, I mean, in some ways, I think that's particularly one of the obligations and the services that a nonfiction writer and an essayist and a memoirist can do, is sort of demonstrate a working relationship to memory and to what happened. And part of the story is the sense that we're making out of our memories, and the collaging that's constantly happening, whether we're conscious of it or not, between other people's memories that they're holding for us, the memories we're holding, and the story that we're creating out of it, right? And that truth is some chimera of all of those things all of the time, right? And so I think for you to offer that on the page, it's so much more useful than to create the artifice of a perfectly formed memory where everything's in its place, right? It's a really sort of permission giving thing, especially for other writers to read, but really for everyone, I think. And I love what you said about just about the experience of sort of looking at the past and at those darkest moments, and that being a way of understanding the vantage point that you're looking at it from, and that you're okay. Like, I felt myself getting choked up because in some ways, like, that's the exercise, right? Like, I don't know, I'm sitting here in the chair and that I've survived it fully until I look back and I see that it's over there now, what happened, you know? And so, like, that distance is, in some ways for me, like the most precious part of reading people's stories like this, and of writing it myself. So I think we just have time for a couple more questions. It goes by so fast, but there's something that that has come up a lot for me. Sorry, there's a chihuahua crying at the door, and Tanika's okay. And you know, and I know comes up a lot for my students. And I think when we're writing about these big events and we're like really putting our back into finding the right form for it, and it's like, you know, I wrote a whole book about being an addict and a dominatrix, and you wrote a whole book about, you know, this experience. And for me, you know, these are the kind of events that make us, right? And that we are relating to for the rest of our lives. But there's always a part of me that feels like, oh, I wrote a book about that. Like, I'm never allowed to talk about it again. You know, like that was it. you got 80,000 words and you're done now. You're 86, you can't talk about it anymore. But actually my relationship to those things that made me and are making me is constantly growing and changing. So I guess I'm curious about your relationship to that, and sort of if you have that fear and if you've walked through it, and I don't know, I guess this is also kind of like a backdoor way of asking you what you're working on now.
It's interesting because I jokingly told people that I wrote this book like a white woman, in that you're just gonna care about this. You're just gonna care about this person and the stuff that she's gone through, because there was a lot of pressure also as a Black woman and I had this moment too, where should I write about the Black experience in a way that explains myself to white people? Should I tie in Sandra Bland? Should I bring Trayvon into this? Should I do all these things that would make my book more interesting to people who don't know or care about me, right? But I had to decide that my story was enough, and my story is enough. And I did go in saying, anything that I say about myself, you're going to care about because you care about what's happening in here, and not because you already care about something that looks like me or something that feels familiar. That your empathy has to come from something tangential. I was very clear that I didn't want that. There's a writer, and I always forget her name, and it always sounds like I'm being shady, and I'm not, a white woman who wrote, before the age of 30, I think she wrote like 4 different memoirs from different perspectives of an eating disorder, of alcoholism. Then she discovered that she had a bipolar disorder, so she wrote her same story from that. So she just kept doing that, and I was like, bet, like absolutely, let's do this some more, because I think that as you grow and as you gain perspective, the same story you've told over and over, stories that I've told about the book, things that I've different perspectives that I've gained, even just from talking to people who were around at that time, I have a different understanding of what was going on, especially knowing that that what I was experiencing, because of the nature of it, is very much in a bubble, and I don't know how I'm affecting other people. And it's very important to me that I do know, because I'm not someone who thinks that everything I feel is just mine, and it doesn't matter what anyone else feels. And because I don't live in a world by myself, and I care very much about the people in my life. So I'm very cognizant of the fact that my truth and my story is different than somebody else's truth and story, right? Who has shared the same experience with me. So I want to go back now, especially now, and every day I'm like the healthiest I've ever been in my life. And I say that every single day. But as this healthy person, going back and looking at the stories from a healthier perspective, as opposed to, and not only that, like one of the things that if I were to write a second book, which again, I don't know, I want to go back and go deeper into relationships, because I think that another thing that I discovered after I wrote the book was that I've never had a healthy relationship. I've always entered either depressed or entered manic, and I've never entered as a healthy person. And I wanted to go in deeper about my relationship, familial, platonic, romantic, everything in between, and how I exist and how I presented myself, because I haven't been the best person, and I wanted to write about what a manic relationship, hypomanic, what it means to put myself in situations that I have, been dishonest about my feelings to people who have been very honest about them to me, and just do that. But I don't want to. But
Well,
if I were to,
if you do, I will read it, and I'm sure everybody on this webinar will also read it. And I will say that, like, I've encountered that over and over again, and I've had that resistance where it's like, oh no, I already took up too much space with this. Like, I can't talk about it again from a different perspective. And I've never regretted yielding to it. And actually, when I see other writers doing that, I find it fascinating, right? Because it is disrupting this story that we're not allowed to change our minds, right? Which is actually an equivalent to no longer growing, right? And when my story about myself and about the past stops changing, I'll know that something is profoundly wrong.
Absolutely.
You know? And I like, you know, even after like I revisited even specific scenes that I had written about in my first book, in my second book, in my third book, I was like, all right, no more BDSM shit. You're done. You're cut off. And like, what do you think happened? Like, I won't spoil it for you because it's unspoilable, but because I've already written about it a million times. But there is like the depth of understanding doesn't get shallower; it gets deeper. You know, the more that you relate to it, like just like you're saying, it's the pacing back and forth across the room and around the apartment, and then it gets into the intricacies of how it affects other people, and then it gets into like our spiritual life, and then it gets into our relationship to the environment, you know, and it really just radiates outward. And for me, like the older I get and the softer I get and the more curious I get, the more I want to see that. So I can't wait. Thank you. So I think it's definitely time for a little Q&A. If people have questions, it looks like they do. I'm going to pull up the little window. And let's see. So this is Mathu, who's one of my wonderful students. And she says she has a question about editing. How do you fight for something you've written and stay confident that it doesn't need editing? How do you know that what you feel is the right choice for the work? I often question myself, ignore my intuition when I'm given edits that I sense are wrong. How can you be sure? I can definitely say that I'm never 100% sure, that it's always, I mean, that's what makes it an art in some ways, you know, like there isn't just one answer, there isn't one right way to do it, but I too have betrayed my gut enough times to know that it is, that I always regret that, you know. And when someone else tells me that my work should be something and I just have that thing, you know, that feeling, I just trust it. The same way that I've developed my ear for my instinct on the page, like when I'm writing and I write a sentence and I think, you're kind of showing off and not being honest here. Like now I just delete the sentence, where before it would be like 6 drafts later, I was like, yeah, it really has to go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So what about you, Bassey?
I think the writing it like a white woman definitely helped me. But I had conversations with another thing about the book is that some of the essays are in first person, second person, third person, different perspectives, because it was easier for me to get into the story, especially if I had disassociated from it as it was happening. So going back and having like a bird's eye view and telling it from that way was helpful to me. And I remember when I was writing it and I was turning it in, the idea was I was supposed to write it in all these different POVs and then change it to first person, like just go and do a find and search and replace type thing. But when I did that, it didn't feel right anymore. It didn't feel like my story. It didn't do what I needed it to do. And I had to tell my editor that if what it is you're telling me you want this book to do, you have to trust the fact that this is the way it has to happen. There were certain sentences that seemed like they just kind of fell off, and she would like write a note like, okay, what's the second half of this thought? And I was like, there is none. That's the way it shows up because that's how my mind works. I can't construct full sentences sometimes. I am struggling to make sure that that the way I understand something is by describing everything around it, and that absence of space is what exists, and you have to trust me, and it'll make sense. And but I have to trust me first, right? I had to approach this like it was the only book I was ever going to write, and that I was a white woman, and everyone was going to need to understand that the way that I was saying it was the only way that it could be said. Doesn't mean that I wasn't open to edits, because I'm always open to edits, because I'm always trying to make sure that I and the editor have the same intent, which is to write the best thing possible. And if I started to feel as though, like I had my former agent, I wouldn't take his notes because I didn't think that we had the same goal in mind, right? But once I've established that we're doing this together, I trust you more, but you also have to trust me and trust that what I'm doing is making sense. There is a line that I remember too that I fought for, where I wrote something like, he thought you was magic. And that kept getting flagged, like, you mean were or is or whatever. And I was like, no, I mean was. And I kept stat, because I was like, the person who is saying it, the familiarity that we have with each other, the grammatically incorrect relationship that we had, that has to stay there. And it means so much to me that she trusted that. I mean, that was one of those things that I would have kept studying anyway. I was like, we're gonna have to fight for this forever, because it's so important that language, especially as a Black person, especially as someone who lives a specific kind of experience, that AAVE, that is just as important as any other punctuation that you need to put in there. So I fought for things like that, but I also conceded when something was too flowery and too purple and too, really just going off the deep end to avoid saying the one thing. I have a hard time writing about sex, and so I get really like, and so stuff like that, she's like, either say it or don't say it. And I had to trust that, because I know that I suck at writing those kinds of things. I'm not comfortable with it. So it's just about trusting yourself and trusting your intent and what it is that you're doing and why.
I think that's so wise. And I would love sometimes to just like have a round table where writers all get together and bring our copy edits to talk about the things that copy editors have tried. And I say this, like, I have more respect for copy editors than almost any other kind of person.
Yeah.
It's amazing the things that they have tried to correct in my work, where it's like, no, that needs to be that way. It's like, you need to write like a white woman, but don't let the copy editor correct your prose so that it reads like a white woman.
Yeah. It was very much, one of the things that I'm terrible at grammar and I'm terrible at punctuation. So if you need to put a comma there, you can have all the commas you want, all the periods. Like I will give all that to you, but I'll fight for the words and the way that they show up on the page. I'll fight you for that.
I love it. Okay, so Katie, and this is probably our last question, sadly, is, can you talk about how you both navigated finding kindness in writing about other people? Yeah, and I can definitely say that if I haven't gotten to a point where I can write with love, with love in my heart, like really feeling it for everyone that I'm writing about, like they don't belong in my book. And that doesn't mean that they're gonna like what I wrote. That's like, it rarely means that. But it means that like it's not fully cooked. You know what I mean? Because for me, like the process of writing means that I am taking the mess in here and I am making sense of it. And I am, I am introducing it to the air out here, and it needs to be, be exposed to like the full breadth of my heart and my intellect and what I'm capable of. And there just isn't room for bitterness, even if it's coming from a wounded place. It's not ready for other people to see it if I haven't gotten to that place, And I think for me, the route to that is almost always looking at my own culpability, right? And looking at the ways that I have collaborated with the people in my life that in the ways that have caused harm and that have hurt me, and also just looking at placing people into the greater context, right? And that doesn't mean that we're not accountable for our actions and that they're not accountable for their actions, but I'm not the arbiter of that, I'm a storyteller, right?
Yeah. I mean, I concur 100%. And I think I learned that from you. You wrote about an abusive relationship, and you did it in a way that didn't make me hate the person you were writing about. mean, I hated them for what they did, but I saw where you loved them, and I saw where you what you saw in them in the first place. Like, they weren't just some villain that showed up and you know, just to ruin your life and then leave. And so I took that to heart when I was writing as well. One of the things that I was very clear about is that I wrote towards, I edited with kindness. I could write whatever I wanted in order to get it out, but I had to make sure that when I edited, that I was editing with that love for that person that I had or have. I wanted to be kind. I wanted people to see what I saw in them, because that thing exists regardless of what happened. If there was anyone, like you said, if there's anyone that I couldn't do that for, they didn't go in the book. There were essays that I was like, this is no reason for this. I'm not here to vilify. I'm also not here to, and going back to one of your earlier questions, one of the things that the book really did for me is it empowered me. I didn't feel like a victim of my circumstances. Things weren't happening to me. I saw the choices that I made that led to certain things. I saw the ways that I was unkind to the people in my life who were trying to be kind to me, the ways that I didn't understand someone's history, and I was taking everything they did personally as opposed to considering who they were before they even met me. So I only wrote where we met, and I didn't try to tell any other stories, but I made sure that I acknowledged that there were other stories. There were things that happened to these people that shaped who they are and shaped how they treated me, but they weren't treating me away because they saw something weak in me or saw something that they hated in me. So I was always very, very clear that I started from a place of love and edited towards kindness to make sure that the people who read the book and were meeting them for the first time also saw that love and saw who they were. I don't think that I was successful all the time. I've read some reviews that I was like, oh my God, that is not what I intended at all. And I wish I would have taken a little bit more care in some instances, but it was always, I'm not ashamed or afraid of the way that I wrote about anyone, because I know that outside of whatever feeling, immediate knee-jerk reactions they had, they know that there was love there and there was a bent towards kindness as much as possible. And then also this understanding that I'm an unreliable narrator. The entire book is about me being unreliable. And so whatever I say that may land a little bit wrong, it's because that's the way it felt in the moment. But I acknowledge that now, looking back, it wasn't that, but it wasn't my responsibility to say, well, now that I think about it 10 years later, that's not what I was doing, but I hope that was implied enough.
Right. Yeah, that's very wise. I have to say there really is something for me that is so liberating in multiple ways, of sort of sitting in the chair and telling the story and taking full accountability for my participation in it, and also like fully acknowledging the ways that I was hurt by it. And that combined with the sort of recognition that I really get more from writing something than anything else, that I am here now, I am the author of this story, and that I am safe. Only from a place of safety can I look with tenderness and sensitivity and love at the people who hurt me. And that is an incredibly powerful place to be, right? To be able to be that tender towards someone who hurt you, and to look at them and see that there's good there, even if they're dangerous, is really liberating. It's much more liberating than villainizing someone or looking at it in a binary kind of way. So it's been really informative for me. Yeah. Bassey, I know that we're out of time, and I just feel like I could talk to you forever. And I'm so moved by your story and your work. And I know that you're going to write so many more books. So please just stop wondering about it and start doing it. And before we sign off, could you just tell people really quickly about Seaway and No Shame Day so that we can funnel some people in that direction?
So the Seaway Project is a nonprofit that I started a few years ago. It's named after Seaway Monsanto. Seaway Monsanto was a young girl that I babysat when I babysat her and her brother when I first moved to New York, and she was 4 years old, and I grew to be like part of their family. She was part of mine. She was like my little sister. And I remember at the age of, she was about 5 or 6, her mother, Dion, shortly after I was diagnosed, asked me some questions about me as a child and how did I know, when did I start feeling a certain way, because she had noticed some things in Seaway. And I thought that it was just amazing that she was so vigilant and had these questions so early, and had questions that I wish people would have asked me when I was 6 and 7 years old. And she did everything she possibly could for Seaway. She had her in different programs and just gave her this amazing life and all this support. But unfortunately, at the age of 15, Seaway didn't want to be here anymore, and we lost her. And I remember thinking about the fact that despite all the support that she had, we I hate saying we couldn't save her, because I think that there's a choice that was made, and she's free, and I love that. But there are people who don't have that kind of support, and I wanted to offer that to people. I wanted them to be able to tell their own stories, and much like the book, I wanted people to know that not only are they not alone, but there are people who are also trying to figure it out as well. And so the Seaway Project is about people telling their own stories. No Shame Day is a day that people have to, again, tell those stories and get support from thousands of people around the world. And one of the most satisfying things has been to see over the last 9 years, people who tentatively started sharing their stories that first year, and then now 8, 9 years later, they're going back and saying, you know, the second year I went to see a therapist, and the third I started medication, and just seeing how far people have come. And it's just, so many people hold in these stories because they don't feel like they'll be loved or liked, or just don't feel like they'd be loved if they told them. And No Shame Day and the Seaway Project is a space that people have to say, this is who I am. This is what I want out of my life. This is why it's been difficult. And will you love me anyway? And the answer has been yes, more often than not. And I just wanted people to have that it's not a lot, but I just want them to be able to have that space to do that. So that's Seaway, that's No Shame Day.
Thank you so much. There's a link in the chat that Lance just posted to the Seaway Project. Thank you, Tin House. Bassey, you're a national treasure. I just love you.
Can I, before I have to interrupt you, because I have to talk about you really quick. You've been so generous with your time, with your experience. You immediately ask me anything. That's what you said. Whenever you need to talk, whatever you need. And I've been shy about it, but I've always been able to know that you were someone who has done the thing and done it the way that felt, I'm not gonna cry. I don't know why I'm getting emotional.
I'm about to turn my camera off because I'm like a slug under a microscope.
I just want you to know how important you are to me, to your students, to the world. I think that you are one of the most loving, giving, empathetic, kindest human beings in the world. And you're able to do so much with your work and with your writing and expose things in people that I read your work and I'm like, I had no idea that I needed any of this, and now I have it. And you do it so beautifully and so, I want to say flawlessly, but I don't mean flawlessly because it is flawed, but it's so beautiful and it's so inspiring. And I just want you to know just how important you are to so many people, and especially me. I wouldn't have been able to write this book had I not read yours and had I not had that conversation with you, and you just even saying, I'm leaving town in an hour, but you want to get coffee. That meant more than anything. And I just want to thank you for that and let you know that here are all your flowers, Melissa.
Yeah, thank you, Bassey. I'm gonna go lie down and die now. Excuse me.
Bassey and Melissa, thank you. I love that you both were talking about writing and editing towards kindness, because this conversation felt like an act of kindness. So thank you both.
Thank you.
And thank you to our interpreters, Rory and Mac, once again. Thanks for everyone in the audience. We do have a link. Tin House Books is, along with Diesel Books, is throwing a poetry reading tonight. So there's a link to that if you want to experience some more goodness a little bit later on. We'll be back a little later this week with some more Tin House Workshop programming. Hope everyone has a good night and is kind to one another. Good evening.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.